It's great to be here. So, normally I'm a pretty annoying guy to deal with as a speaker. I don't respond to my email very well, but these guys have done at LifeRay have done a terrific job, and in particular, they've dealt with some of my kind of quirks. At one point, they apparently asked me for a photo. That's the kind of email that just kind of gets ignored with all the kind of crises of the day. And at some point, I went on to the symposium website, and I saw that they had this very nice photo of me that I did not send them. And it was a little bit surprising to see this photo for two reasons. One is I'm wearing a tie. I don't wear a tie. I'm not wearing a tie right now. And I knew that particular year I only wore a tie for one reason, and that's because my wife and I had attended a school fundraiser together. And they photoshopped my wife out. And I was like, "What? That is awesome! I am so impressed. If I could just ignore all my emails and know that someone photoshopping it would take care of everything, that would be terrific." So these guys did a great job, and in particular took great care of me. I had our third was born recently. I had a daughter, and James and I've known one another for a long time. And he sent me this. This is a onesie. This is my daughter. She's very cute, which is good because she's a third kid. Otherwise, she'd be ignored. So I'm glad she's cute. But you can see there's that onesie has got a block comment on it in C. This is sadly the only code in this presentation. Normally, I give much more technical presentations than this. But that block comment, if you can't see it, says you are not expected to understand this. And I don't know if anyone knows what that is a reference to. That's a reference to the original Unix source code, 6th edition source code. And the story behind that is there was an intern. This is taken to mean that Unix is so hard to understand that no one is expected to ever understand anything in Unix. It's actually not the case. This was a comment that was added after they brought in an intern at Bell Labs. This is back in the 70s. And that intern was expected to understand and document the entire source base as kind of an exercise. Well, as it turns out, the code that does the context switching in the kernel is really difficult to understand, and they wanted to leave a marker for the intern to know you can stop here. You're not expected to understand this. So that's where that comment comes from, but I think it's terrific because often we don't understand what's going on with our infants either. So what am I going to talk about today? I want to talk, and actually I'll go back to the title there, because what I'm going to talk about, and I'll include my wife for now, I want to talk about open source anti-patterns. And it's terrific to be here where LifeRay is such a strong believer in open source, and so many of the sponsors here are strong believers in open source, but we are all corporations. Ultimately, we are seeking to be businesses that are self-sustaining, that have vitality. So, but we all believe in open source. So let's talk about the history of open source, because back in the beginning, it was all open. In the beginning, in the dawn of computing, software was not the valuable thing. The valuable thing was the hardware. And no one really thought of the software was just like the stuff that these hippies did up to make the hardware work. No one actually really cared about the software. I mean, they cared about it, they understood that it was important, but no one cared about the ownership of the software. And so people were free to share software. And indeed, it used to be, back in the day, that when you bought software, it came with source code. And you can look no further than 6th edition Unix. 6th edition Unix, when it was made available in the late 70s, was just source code with no copyrights on it whatsoever. And it was with 7th edition, when they released the next edition of Unix, AT&T realized that maybe this is actually some property here that we need to go protect. And that's actually what kicked off the Unix wars, when they actually put that under a copyright and began to viciously pursue those who were using Unix, using the source code of Unix. But originally Unix was just source that everyone shared. And even IBM, if you bought software from IBM, that included source code. And actually, a friend of mine is a guy named Tom Hill at EDS, and Tom has been at EDS forever, or was at EDS forever, very early at EDS. And Tom and I are having a conversation about the history of open source, and he whips out this little black book that he has clearly had since the dawn of time. And he flips through it, and he highlights a note that he made to himself on February 17th, 1983. And that note was made because the IBM sales rep had just visited him and had told them, EDS, that IBM was no longer going to ship source code. IBM was moving to an all-object model. And he said, at that moment, I knew the computer industry was changing. because I, as a customer of this software, was no longer, I was no longer going to be able to see how it worked. I was no longer going to be able to modify it or to understand it or to enhance it. There was this new model we were going towards. And that model, I think, was really epitomized by Microsoft. You remember that memo that Bill Gates sent, that letter that Bill Gates sent to the hobbyists when it was micro-soft, this unknown compiler company from Albuquerque, New Mexico, because people were taking the basic interpreter for the Altair, and damn it, they were just sharing it with themselves. They weren't paying Microsoft. And there's a very cantankerous, there's a little angry young man that sent a very indignant letter this began in the late 70s, perhaps early 80s, about how we should be paying for software. And of course, that was Bill Gates, and Microsoft relocated to Seattle. And it kicked off what was really a proprietary software movement. Such to the point, by the late 80s, early 90s, open source software was forgotten. Really, we were in an all-proprietary mold, an all-proprietary world. The Unices, the Unix variants were all proprietary, operating systems were all proprietary. And then open source started to creep in a little bit. And I would say that Perl is one of kind of the early examples of this, but there are surely others, where you had that software that was developed that was incredibly valuable, that was always open source, that people began to use. How many people would have used Perl if it had been proprietary? Many fewer. I think it's very hard to monetize a language, very hard to monetize a programming environment. And so it started with Perl and Python, and then it snuck into the operating systems, or snuck into the web servers, the dawn of the web. And the preeminent web server becomes Apache, an open source server. And you see it in the databases, in MySQL and Postgres. And this was really coming from folks who needed this stuff, who wanted to implement it for themselves. So open source started to become a trend. We started to see it. And then we had the dot-com bust. I assume there are plenty of us in the room who are old enough to remember the dot-com bust. It's difficult. I mean, these children today are insufferable, aren't they? They don't actually remember what the nuclear winter was like in our industry. We think things are heady today. They were redonkulous. They were stupid in 2000, and the nuclear winter that followed was crushing. And every single entity was under pressure to cut costs as much as possible. And in that environment, open source became actually a lot more attractive. And instead of being just interested in open source, all of a sudden, open source became mandatory, especially at the lower levels of the platform, of the operating system, of the runtime, the languages. And entire companies were built on that idea. You cannot build a Google without open source. You cannot build a Facebook without open source. You cannot build an Amazon without open source. The economics don't add up. You can't make it work. So it was critical that we actually had open source because it allowed these companies to blossom. And they used open source ferociously. And I say ferociously because I worked for Sun Microsystems at the time with James, and we had an operating system to sell. It's very hard to sell an operating system when the expectation is that an operating system is open source. And it's very hard to go into it to a Google and so on. They were not interested in buying an operating system. It's okay, we get it. We get it. So, we, as an OS vendor in particular, we recognized that we actually had to make it open source to go compete. If we wanted to go compete with Linux and the BSDs, it absolutely had to be open source. So we did something very gutsy. We took this proprietary Unix, and we were going to open source it. And it took a long time, and it took a lot of lawyers, sadly. Because when we developed Solaris, we had no idea that we were going to go open source it later. So when we went to go develop it, we were signing contracts and so on, kind of crazy covenants with folks that prohibited us from open sourcing it. We had to go renegotiate all of those things. It took a long time. But we did it. We did it. And once it was open source, we developed it in the open. And it became, I think, still one of the largest, most profound pieces of software to leap the chasm from proprietary to open. And Sun did certainly some things right when we open sourced Solaris. We learned a lot from that. We also did a lot of things wrong. Now, sadly, I think my brain is just broken. I only learn from the things I do wrong. When I do things right, I just assume it's my own innate genius and don't realize how much luck has got to do with it. When I do things wrong, it's like you got to kind of go back and look at it and say, okay, what did we do wrong here? And we did a lot of things wrong. We did a lot of things wrong in the open source community. And then Sun, of course, just did not become a going concern. We were bought by Oracle, maybe invaded by Oracle in 2010. So Oracle and Sun are very different companies. I think very different models. And it became quickly clear that Oracle had zero interest in open source. And I think actually the kind of the root difference is that Sun was born a competitor, and Sun really wanted to compete. Sun, you may or may not remember, was the company that not only developed NFS, but ported it to its competitors' platforms to level the playing field. Not only did it develop Java, but supported Java on other platforms to level the playing field. Oracle is not interested in competition. No offense to Oracle. Oracle is interested in domination. And Oracle is interested in having natural monopolies of software and then juicing those monopolies as much as possible. Open source software is about choice, and Oracle is not about choice. And this is not a value judgment. This is a statement of fact. And in fact, it speaks highly of Oracle, or speaks largely of Oracle, that if Ellison were in the room right now, it'd be like, what's the point? Go on. Of course. Yes. We dominate. What's that? So, I mean, this is not a contentious point. This is just a statement of fact. And it was very clear that they were not interested at all in open source because open source was antithetical to that domination. Open source gave customers too much choice. And if you look down the line at the open source projects that Oracle has inherited, down the line they have butchered each one or asphyxiated each one. MySQL, Java, certainly Solaris, Jenkins, and so on. So it was very clear that this was going to happen to us as well. And that they were not going to continue to develop the operating system. Now, the thing that was a bit surprising is that they actually wanted to close the operating system. Now, that doesn't make any sense. It's open source. You can't close something that's open source. You can't get it back. That doesn't make sense. And tried to talk some reason into Oracle, but really did not see it that way. And they did not see that this was a poor business decision to close the operating system. But indeed, it was, and that's what they did. They actually, they've never formally announced it, but in this memo sent on August 13th, 2010, they decided that they would no longer develop in the open, and Solaris became proprietary. Now, as I told them at the time, you're not closing the system, you're forking it. And by forking it, you're betting that you can retain the talent that developed Solaris. Fortunately, the talent doesn't want to work for a company that would engage in this kind of a depraved act. Now, why do I call this a depraved act? Because one of the important elements of open source is that it is a social contract. It's a social contract for those who participate in it and those who develop it. And to rip up that social contract and make it re-proprietary, the word doesn't even exist. I mean, you can open source something, but there's no way to proprietarize something. I don't know what the verb is. I mean, it's like, kudos to Oracle for inventing an entirely new concept in open source. We have to come up with a verb for that. But they decided to fork the system, and they thought they would retain the talent. Of course, the talent's not interested in working for that. The talent left. There was a Solaris diaspora. I and many other engineers that developed the core technologies of Sun, of Solaris, walked. And we went out into the community. And from the ashes of OpenSolaris rose illumos. Illumos is derived from OpenSolaris. We've got the name comes from illuminare, the Latin for illuminate. And all of the Solaris diaspora landed in illumos. And we are all, now 2.5 years later almost, we are continuing to innovate. And we are continuing to develop these core technologies. And we do it at Joyent, it's our smart OS, but we are continuing to develop the things that made us different in the marketplace. And I won't tell the full story here. If you Google Forkaphobia illumos, you'll see the full story, a presentation that I gave at Usenix. I will warn you that I'm a bit candid in that presentation about my feelings about Oracle. I'm sorry. Yeah, do you think that was candid? Yeah, no, that was not candor, by the way. That was very restrained. And actually, I feel I was even restrained, frankly, in my Usenix talk. I mean, I've often said that any explanation of Oracle that doesn't end in Nazi allegory does not fully explain Oracle. In fact, I've often joked that if you're actually more like observed, that if you wished to explain the Nazis to someone who was only an Oracle customer, you would probably explain it in Oracle allegory. Imagine that Larry Ellison ran a country. Oh, God, oh, my God, yeah, controlled an army. Oh, my God, yes, exactly. Exactly, it was awful. It's World War II, you should look it up. It's terrible, terrible, terrible stuff. So I was very restrained in that talk, but the videos for this talk become available, and I noticed that my video is not up there. And I'm like, all right, whatever, they're just having a hard time processing the videos or what have you. But my coworkers are all like, conspiracy theory. Larry is preventing your video from getting out there. Now, I know Larry doesn't give a damn. I mean, if Larry cared about every time someone disliked Larry, he'd spend all of his time worried about that. He does not care. But who knows what was going on. But a week passes, 2 weeks passes, 2 weeks pass, and finally the video appears. At the beginning of the video, there's this huge disclaimer. The following opinions are not the opinions of the Usenix Association, A disclaimer that has never appeared on any Usenix video ever. Okay. Then you go into the presentation, and the format of the presentation is like there are slides, and there's a little talking head kind of down here in the lower right-hand corner, and there's this little like black dead area above the speaker. Well, they took this disclaimer and kind of re-justified it and put it over my head for the entire presentation. And I was thinking, like, man, when I got really colorful about Oracle, they should have started to, like, strobe it or something, or, like, start pointing to it. Like, seriously, not us. This guy off the reservation. And, of course, Oracle was the sponsor of the conference, and they were very concerned that Oracle would care. And, of course, Oracle doesn't care because Oracle is mechanized. They don't actually care about anything. So, anyway, but enough about Oracle. So illumos arose, and I think the key question is this. Can we treat OpenSolaris as an object lesson? OpenSolaris has been through a lot, and there are many lessons, I think, here, both about the power of open source, the challenges of moving from a proprietary source base to an open one, and some of the mistakes you can make along the way. And, I imagine you know this, but the mistakes that we made out of good intentions. We were trying very hard to do the right thing, but we often missed the mark and did the wrong thing. So I'm hoping that I can help you in your organization, organizations that you've got contact with, to understand some of our mistakes and try to make different ones, is the thing I would say. So the first mistake is the most basic one, and this is what I would call inverted thinking. When you think about open sourcing a body of software, the most natural thing to think about, if you own a line of business that includes the software, is what will this buy me? What will this buy me? And that's the wrong way to frame the problem. Because then you're framing the problem as like, it feels like I'm giving away something that I have. I'm just giving it away. Why am I doing that? It's like, no, that's the wrong way to think about it. The right way to think about it is, what does this cost me? Because here's the deal about software. And here's what separates software from everything else that has ever been produced. Software is both machine and information. It has the properties of both. That is the essential duality of software, is that it looks, feels, and smells like a machine with moving parts, but when it comes to actually producing it, it's like information. It flows like information. Wow. Wow. That means that the cost of producing software is zero. There's no manufacturing line for your software. There's a download link. Maybe it's bandwidth, but it's very hard to even see that in the noise of all the cat videos and everything else. The cost of producing software is zero. That's amazing. That's not true of anything else that we really do, that the cost is zero. Now, obviously, there's a huge fixed cost to develop it up front, but that marginal cost is zero. So the key thing is that when you give your software to someone who wasn't going to use it anyway, it costs you nothing. It costs you nothing because it didn't cost you anything to make. And the important thing to remember is, well, hey, this guy, he took my software for free. Well, let me tell you something about that guy. That guy that took your software, downloaded your software, used it, and they operationalized it, and they supported it, and they own the source code. They'll make modifications to it. They'll enhance it. Let me give you a news flash about that guy. Wasn't going to pay you anyway. That is not a lost customer. That's a customer who loves running science experiments, which is great. But if they weren't running your software, they'd be running your competitor's software. and if your competitor's software is not open source, they'd be either using an open source body of software that does the same thing, or they'd be writing their own. And by the way, that software that they write, that's the software that will put you out of business one day. So when you've got that guy that is taking your software, operationalizing it, and supporting it, and productizing it, wasn't going to give you anything anyway. So you might as well open source it, because then you can get some returns out of it. You can get some kind of tertiary returns. So it's very kind of core to internalize that. Because once you kind of internalize that, once you realize that, wait a minute, this isn't actually costing me anything, and the guy that's going to use this wasn't going to give me any money anyway, now you can start to focus on what are the benefits of this. So there are these people that will do amazing things with your software. What are the benefits of this? Well, for most bodies of software, there is significant marginal gain to having more people use it. So it may be that you're getting bug fixes. It may be that you're getting testing. Maybe you've got we just had this happen recently with the VRRP support we have in the operating system. Kind of an obscure feature. It was developed by one of my engineers. Couldn't really get any of us interested. We were all very busy on our own things. But it's all open source. As it turns out, all these people in the community are using this and loving it and finding bugs with it and interacting with him. And it's been great. We've been able to make the support much, much better because of the presence of the community. So you get that kind of secondary and tertiary benefit. And then you also, if you have an API, you get a network effect. You get a network effect by having more people use your software. You can view it as just lead gen. Right? If someone is using your software, that's probably a pretty well-qualified lead. You may have something to go sell that person. Maybe they don't know that you're selling support. Maybe they don't know that you've got additional things that you can offer that person. So when you switch your thinking around from what is this going to buy me to what is this going to cost me, there's a whole world of opportunity that opens up. So another anti-pattern, and this is a basic one. This is one that we actually, it's a mistake that we did not make. Don't open source anything without the source code. It seems obvious, but you'd be amazed how many people make this mistake. Like, this open source thing, it's exciting, it's great. Okay, we're going to announce our intent to open source something. Never do this. Never do this. Your press release to open source something only needs to be a link to the repository. That's it. In fact, the tighter you make that press release, the more people will appreciate the fact that you're truly opening something up and allowing people to actually go use it and use the source code. So we saw that HP did this. They announced they were going to open source the WebOS in December of 2011. And I have to say, at the time, and they're like, we're going to open source it and we're going to make it available in September of 2012. You're like, no way. That 9-month gap, so much can go wrong. In particular, you could find that you've got a legal agreement that you can't go renegotiate on your proprietary software. And they did discover that there are some things that they were not able to open source because of that. They did, however, and I was surprised, and kudos to them, they did ultimately open source this on the last day of September 2012, which is great, but they lost so much credibility in the meantime. And you did not need to do this. Now, HP has long been known in Silicon Valley as the company that would market sushi as cold dead fish. So I suppose it's not a tremendous surprise, but all the same, it was not necessary. It was an unnecessary self-inflicted wound by HP. So don't make that mistake. That's an easy one to not make. If you're contemplating open sourcing something, just keep quiet and get it done. Once it's open source, announce it, and announce it with the source code. Very simple. One trap, one anti-pattern that, boy, did we at Sun really fell into. And this is something of an easy pitfall to fall into. So a fork is when we take a body of software and we begin to develop things that are not in that trunk of the software. And we at Sun were forkaphobic. We were petrified that there was going to be another Solaris, another OpenSolaris that would arise that would be different from our OpenSolaris, and everybody would be confused, and there would be much sadness. And there's actually, what we missed at the time, and now we can see so clearly, is that there is something of a forking paradox. When you are paranoid of forking in that regard, you need to keep everybody in the room on the same page. And there are going to be people who disagree with you. Always. There are going to be people who want to do something different. But when you're afraid to fork, you've got to persuade that person. You want to persuade them to, no, don't do your thing. Come on, we're going to all agree on this stuff. Well, we're not going to agree. And that person is going to be more and more tempted to just say, no, forget it. I'm just going my own way. This sucks. This is not fun. Conversely, if you say, hey, you know what? Everyone can fork whenever they want. People don't actually fork because they can go experiment in their own downstream repos, but they want to push their stuff upstream. I think when you're forkaphobic, I would liken it to the East Germans erecting the Berlin Wall. Right? They erected the Berlin Wall to keep people in. Just made people want to leave. And East Germans will tell you that they wanted to leave, not to leave East Germany or leave East Berlin, but to visit their family and come back. They still viewed themselves as East Berliners. And whereas we in the West just believed, hey, you know what? The way to get people to stay is to not have any walls whatsoever. Allow people to travel. And people will come home. So I think it's the same thing with forking. You really want to encourage that kind of experimentation. And it can be tough, because there will be people who will do things you're like, oh my God, that is insane. But you have to know that if it's insane, people are not gonna gravitate towards it. If everyone gravitates towards it, you might be the one that's insane. That actually does happen. So you have to be careful about that. But you really want to encourage forking, which can be tough. And I think you got to really give credit to Linux for having shown us that this is the case. Linux is, and Torvalds' answer to every debate is, hey, you don't like it, go fork it. And I love that answer, because it just cuts off. I don't want to have endless discussion. Like, I think you're wrong, you think you're right, go fork it, and if everyone loves it, they'll start using your thing, and we'll pull it into mainline. The end. And there were plenty of things, by the way, that Torvalds was wrong about, that he did end up pulling into the mainline. So it worked actually very, very well. I think it's actually the key thing that Linux did right, something that we can really all learn from, and certainly you can learn from the fact that we did it wrong. So why is this so bad? Well, because there's a really nasty side effect of being forkaphobic, which I call the governance orgy. So if we all need to agree, let's face it, we're not all going to agree, but if we all need to putatively agree, guess what we're going to have? We're going to have elections. We're going to have a democracy. And if you are having elections with your open source project, you have failed. You have failed. No one should be casting a vote for the leadership of an open source project. I mean, don't we all get enough politics in the real world? Software is never land. This is fun. That's why we got into this. We don't need to create elections over here. And the reason that elections are so corrosive, the reason that they are so divisive, is because there are two side effects you cannot avoid from elections. One is politics, and the other is losers. Who wants to be in a community of politics and losers? Because losers, by the way, are not psyched. Like, if you have someone who stood for election in your community, put themselves out there, and has been told by the community, actually, sit down. It's like, does that feel good? No, that feels like crap. You want to leave. And at OpenSolaris, we did like the worst possible thing. We did this massive experimentation in democracy where we would have, it was like the Polish Senate from, like the 30s. We would have, 500 people standing for election, 491 of them being told to sit down. It's like, oh, that's good. All right, we've now alienated the entire community with all this kind of like ranked choice voting and just this kind of crazy nonsense garbage. And it was all the wrong paths. And by the way, you can't have an election. I mean, don't think you can just rush into an election. We have to have a constitutional convention. It's like, what are we talking about? We've got to have amendments. And you can't just bring an amendment to the floor. You got to have. It's like, whoa, wait, what planet am I on? You're on the planet that's afraid to fork. The answer to everybody is, hey, everybody, let's just go off and do our own thing, okay? Let's have a good time. Everyone go off and do your own thing. And the good ideas, we're going to naturally vote in our use of this system on the good ideas. And when a good idea, we're all gravitating towards a good idea, we're going to pull that into mainline. And that works. And governance does not in open source projects. I think another thing that people fall into, another trap, and you see corporate entities fall into this all the time, they confuse open source with democracy. They think, oh, we're going to open source this, therefore, we need to put everything to a vote, and we need to have, but ultimately, the corporation doesn't quite believe in the democracy. And ultimately, if the democracy votes to overthrow the corporate entity, like, no, we're not going to tolerate that. Oh, no, I'm sorry. No, we have a slight misunderstanding of democracy. You ever looked at the Declaration of Independence? It's great to actually take the Declaration of Independence, take off the line that everybody knows, we find these just to be self-evident, take the rest of the document, and just start floating it around to, friends and family, and like, oh my God, like, you've gone around the bend. This is radical stuff. I mean, because it basically says the people have an inalienable right to overthrow their government. It's like, whoa, whoa, whoa. Easy, Tea Party. Easy, easy. No one wants to give an open source movement that much democracy, right? So it's like, the only thing worse than actual democracy, which pretty much sucks, is farcical democracy, which is the worst. Like, let's pretend we're democratic and get all of the negative side effects of democracy, but none of the actual positive ramification, positive side effect that we as a body get to collectively decide our future. And boy, did we fall into this trap in OpenSolaris. And we stepped in it big time. What ended up happening was the democratically elected community wanted to do one thing, and Sun wanted to do another, around the name of the distro in particular. Sun wanted to name the distro, its own distro, OpenSolaris, which created some confusion. So the OpenSolaris community is like, wait, that's our name, isn't it? What's going on? And Sun's like, actually, we're taking that name, our name, we're going to do it. And everyone felt very alienated, and it was a disaster. Don't do that. And kind of pursuant to that, but you think, wait a minute, I'm open sourcing this thing. Like, don't they all want to participate? Yes, they want to participate, but they want you to lead. You wrote it. You had the vision. Your engineers had the vision for this. You created it. You lead it. People want leadership. You don't need to eschew leadership to open source something. These things are orthogonal. You can open source a project and retain leadership. Just be upfront about it. And this is the model, by the way, we have always had in open source. We call it the benevolent dictator for life model, BDFL. And now you need to be transparent about that leadership. You need to be inclusive. But that's the B in BDFL. That's the benevolence. When people have a good idea, you want to uplift that idea. That's what good leadership is. But don't eschew that leadership. And now there's a challenge here. Part of that leadership is that technical leadership. You are going to need to give visibility to the actual nucleotide base pairs in your organization, the engineers that actually created this. You're going to need to give them visibility and uplift them, raise them. But it's a good thing. It's a good thing for your brand. It's a good thing for your engineers. And there are, I think, a lot of positive examples of this. I would actually think, admittedly, it's fresh in my mind from just returning from visiting this group, but I actually think the most positive example of this that I can think of right at the top of my head is V8 from Google. You know, V8 is the JavaScript engine in Chrome, and boy, do those guys do a good job. They did not have to open source V8 at all. Right? V8 could have been in Chrome, could have been proprietary at the end. But Lars Bach, the creator of V8, wanted to open source it because he wanted it to go beyond Chrome. And so it did, and it became the core of Joyent's Node.js. And it's gone in many different places. And they did it by uplifting their engineers and giving their engineers visibility. So it's a really great move by Google. Google did a terrific work on V8. So you want to almost turn your organization inside out, uplift these individual innovators. And the key is, and I know this is hard, this can be very hard to internalize, but organizations don't actually innovate. People talk about our innovative organization. You don't have an innovative organization. You have an organization that fosters and cultivates innovative people. It is people that innovate. And your innovation walks out the door every night. And if you turn into a jerk, the way Oracle did, your innovation doesn't come back in the next day. So you need to really internalize that. But it's a good thing to internalize. It's a good thing to internalize. It's similar to eschewing leadership. We see people that eschew ownership. This idea of like, I'm going to give the source code to a foundation. This is a terrible idea. Because in order to give software to a foundation, first of all, foundations are not simple. People, if you've been involved with a 501c3, you know how complicated they are. People who've never been involved with a 501c3 have like, oh, we'll just give it to charity. It's like, well, it doesn't quite work that way. And if you're going to have a nonprofit, the IRS needs that nonprofit to be capitalized. You can't have a nonprofit that is not capitalized. And the capitalization that will need to come from the software. The software needs to be owned by the nonprofit. By the way, those board of directors, they need to be independent. You can't control them. Because otherwise, the IRS doesn't want you to have a vehicle to evade taxes. So the fact that these foundations are tax exempt creates all sorts of complexities that you don't want to have. When you eschew ownership, you are required to eschew leadership. Don't do this. Adobe just made this mistake with PhoneGap. I think it was a huge mistake. People love to give things to the Apache Foundation. Don't do it. You don't need to do it. You can be legitimate without giving something to the Apache Foundation, and you take on a whole lot of bureaucracy in exchange. So I really recommend that people do not give away, do not establish a foundation, maintain your leadership, unless you truly don't care about it anymore, and you're just like throwing it out. And if you want to take your open source and like put it on the curb marked free, fine, and someone will come pick it up. But I would recommend, if you are at all interested in the thing that you are open sourcing, you should retain ownership. It's very common, by the way. Competitive paranoia is an anti-pattern we see a lot. You think, like, the second I open source it, my competitors are going to be all over this, and they're going to take it, and they're going to disappear. Yeah, newsflash, your competitor thinks you're an idiot, by the way. But the reason your competitor thinks you're an idiot is because they're an idiot. That's why they think that. Of course they think that. Like, of course those idiots think I'm an idiot. They always think idiot things like that. But that's not true. Go to your competitor. So just make that true, right? Make that tautologically true. And this is amazing to me. The not invented here syndrome, NIH. You heard of this? And the NIH syndrome? The NIH syndrome is so deeply profound that your competitor will go out of business before they take your innovation, where you truly compete. And I speak out of experience. I developed this technology called dtrace at Sun, and we open sourced dtrace as the first bit of Solaris. And we were putting Linux in a spot with not having dtrace, especially on Wall Street. We knew Red Hat wanted it very, very badly. And the question was Red Hat going to take dtrace and just plop it into Linux? And this was in 2005. And I could see it like showing up in a month. But here it is, 2012, 7 years later, and it's still not there. And the reason it's still not there is because Red Hat did their own thing. Of course, they hate my thing. They think I'm an idiot, right? So they did their own stupidly idiotic thing. That is a totally unbiased opinion, by the way. But they did their own stupidly idiotic. So fine. Your competitors aren't going to adopt it. Who did adopt it? What was the company that actually took my technology and integrated it right into their system? The last company I would expect, Apple. And your MacBooks all have my software on them. Not a competitor of Sun's. And it was a tremendous boon to the community that Apple did this. And Apple did it because they weren't our competitors. For them, it's like, they're just like, no, this thing's awesome. We want it. We want it in the Mac. We're all about awesome. Let's take it. They did not take Red Hat's thing, by the way. I'll just point that out. Just observation, statement of fact. I think that another anti-pattern we see is what I call anti-collaborative licensing. And this actually dovetails into the NIH bit with dtrace. There are these things called copyleft licenses, the GPL, and then the AGPL is even crazier, that have these very expansive definitions of derived work, where if you take this body and combine it with something else, the combined derived work must be under this license, this very expansive license. And this has been called toxic or viral. I think it is viral. I mean, I don't know if I would call it toxic, but it is viral. It was an interesting experiment. It was very important, I would say, in the late 80s and early 90s when open source was kind of on the ropes and we were in this proprietary world. But that's not the world we're in anymore. And right now, GPL v2 is cutting against us. And it is prohibiting. The reason that Red Hat will tell you we couldn't take dtrace, we couldn't take ZFS into Linux, is because it was under a different license, even though it was an open source license. Surely, we did not write the GPL to erect walls within open source software. It's ridiculous. And actually, if you look at the trend line for GPL, it's pretty interesting. This is actually a graph that I took earlier in the year. You can't really see it on the right there. But that's GPL. The blue and red lines are GPL. That's GPL v2 and all GPL above it. And you can see it's trending down. It's actually accelerated much more than they projected. That light gray is the projection. So this was at, you can see it was projected to be at 38% by September. It was 36% by June, 32% by September. This is from Black Duck. The GPL is in free fall right now. The GPL is in free fall because we're beyond it. Like, we get it. Open source, we get it. We don't need the radicals anymore. We get it. And if you look at the top projects on GitHub, there's only one of the top 50 projects that is GPL. That one project? Linux. Okay, that's a big deal, surely. But there are a lot of these other things that are also big deals that we're using all over the stack, and they're not GPL. They're MIT, BSD, Apache, some stuff in the public domain. The jQuery is both MIT and GPL, dual license, kind of nutty. Some stuff has got no license. But don't use these strong copyleft licenses. They're just corrosive. They don't buy you anything. And that brings us into a bit of an anti-pattern that becomes tempting. It's the dual license for profit. I'm going to take the exact same software, and I'm going to open source a version that's got the GPL on it, and then I will sell you same software, my proprietary license. Total anti-pattern. Because it gives you all these backwards incentives. Now, that doesn't mean, by the way, that you can't take software and sell proprietary add-ons. Take an open source software and have proprietary plugins or modules and so on. That's fine. Or proprietary service, what have you. That's fine. That's fine. But don't take the exact same body of software and have it under two separate models. Because the reason that is such an anti-pattern is because it incentivizes you to FUD the open source version. It's like, well, you can take the GPL version. You know what that means. GPL. Richard Stallman may come, visit you in a dream and like throw food out of his beard at you or something. Or you can take our proprietary version. Yes, proprietary version. Safe, sound. No, wrong model, wrong model. Your customers, again, newsflash, and many of you are LifeRay customers. Those of you who are LifeRay customers, is it the little proprietary bits that you're buying, or is it the knowledge that you can pick up the phone when you're having a bad day and know that LifeRay is going to be on the other end and help you out? And that, when we stand up software in production, we want to have that person on the other end of the phone pick it up. And nobody is going to ask that you give your support away for free, because everyone knows that the cost of support is not zero. But people do know that the cost of software does trend towards zero. So don't dual license for profit. It seems tempting. It is the wrong thing to do. We know MySQL will die because of this. MySQL is dying right now because they adopted this model. MySQL AB adopted this model, was bought by Sun. Oracle was behaving, newsflash, in the worst possible way with this dual model. I know this is a total shock. And as a result, we're seeing a real renaissance in Postgres. And this is the reason why. So I got just one or two more anti-patterns here. Demanding copyright assignment. It's very tempting to say that every time that someone contributes to your software, they need to give you copyright assignment. I wouldn't say never do it, but be careful. When you do this, the bad actors, namely Oracle, have kind of shattered the public trust. Because they took copyright assignment and then took that software proprietary. You need to be careful when you do this and be aware that when you're doing this, it's not just a contract, but a social contract that you're signing here. So I think that all these anti-patterns, especially that last one, but just in general, don't treat these as hard and fast rules. Your conditions are going to vary. Trust your gut, trust your market, trust your customers, and don't feel that you're not doing open source for anyone that's kind of in the broader world. You're not doing it for a news story. You're doing it for your software. You're doing it for your engineers. You're doing it for your customers. You're doing it for the vitality of the innovation that you have. And in the illumos community, we are very mindful of these anti-patterns, especially the governance orgy. And you'll see us learning from these at Joyent, where I'm the SVP of engineering. We steadfastly avoid these anti-patterns in the projects that we lead, namely Node.js and SmartOS. It's essential to our business, open source. So it's very important to us to be good stewards of this stuff, not just to be good folks, which of course we are and want to be, not just because we view it as a social contract, which we do, but because it's essential to our business. It's essential to us growing the company. And we're making mistakes, no doubt. I just hope we're making new ones. And with that, thank you very much.